All right. So today we are going to take up basically what is development and what is development economics. And even in the next class, we're going to do this. And Debraj Ray is one of my favorite authors in development economics. He's written this textbook. But we're going to use very little of textbook, and it's all going to be readings, even if it's Debraj Ray. But this first way in which he introduces development economics is rather interesting. So I've taken that up as your first kind of introduction to development and to development economics. I will try to share a screen now. Okay, is that showing up?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Okay. Okay, I've tried to be a little savvy and get a little at a time onto the screen so that we concentrate. All right, so development economics, I hope you all have thought about what it is before you came here. Obviously, we'll be talking about the transformation of economies from stagnation to growth, or this is standard definition, from low income to high income countries, and basically talk about how these countries, as they transited from low to high income, overcame their problems of poverty, inequality, and a whole lot of other disparities which are existing. And if they didn't, then why they didn't, and what kind of policies might be helping them to move. What are the experiences of different countries? That's one way in which they look at development economics. But Debraj Ray would like to differ a little bit from that. And he says that in normal development economics is taught in this international context. So the developing countries are looked at in comparison to the other countries. And we are looking at the path of development and how it has moved and so on and so forth. So you're looking at everything in a global context, which is a fair way of doing it. And it is the traditional way of doing development economics. But he makes this point, and his textbook is not that new. It's just a 1998 textbook. We are getting newer versions of it. So it was written at that time. So some of the things that he talks about, it stops at a point in time, and then he has other articles which we will look at. So he says it's equally important to look at what is happening within the developing countries, and what are the internal issues that they have there. What are the internal issues with regard to the structure of these developing countries. So he says that a large part of the development economics, at least in his textbook, will be looking at within country issues. And we will also be doing a lot of that, because just comparing across countries is not going to get us anywhere. And in any case, the context, the international context has changed over time. So if a country developed in the 90s, then the conditions are totally different today, and that cannot be taken care of, particularly after the arrival of WTO trade rules and so on. And now, of course, we have a whole lot of other problems. The second way he says that he'd like to look at it is by viewing development as a problem of market failures, and market failures causing the kind of problems that are existing in the developing countries. And then that creates a potential for government intervention. So public policy then comes in because there is a market failure. And what are the kind of market failures? He speaks about a couple of them. Now, I'm going to take you through a set of a whole range of market failures which are defined in the literature, and try to discuss with you examples of these kind of market failures. We may or may not be looking at all of them we'll not have papers on every single one of them, because we ultimately have only 26 sessions, and it's really difficult to manage more than that. But we will try and see what are these market failures. And then every time we do a reading, or we take up a module or a particular theme that we're going to discuss, you will be able to identify some of these market failures there due to which that problem is existing. And as Debraj Ray says in his book, he has chosen a particular set of issues to talk about, because that's the only way you can talk about it, because there are thousands of issues facing the developing world and the developed world as well now. So ultimately, it does become a question of what I think is important or your teacher thinks is important. It also, in my case here now in this school, I also have to worry about the level at which I can take the readings. All right. So I will first I'll just tell you what are the various market failures we're going to go through, and then we'll go through each of them. So what is a market failure? Okay, can somebody tell me what is a market failure? You management students would definitely be talking about that all the time in your classes.
Market failure is when a particular market of any goods is unable to maintain the equilibrium on its own. So the
Right.
supply and the demand or the production, each of factors of the market.
Right. It doesn't operate efficiently enough due to some particular situation which has arisen. Right. So the outcomes, the market is working, but then the market is in such a situation where, so that the outcomes that are generated by that market failure are not the most efficient outcomes that you would like. Does anybody else want to tell us what market failure is?
Ma'am, it's a situation where allocation of resources, particularly I would say goods and services, are not Pareto efficient.
Right. So certain circumstances occur due to which you're not getting an efficient solution of distribution of resources as well. All right. So it occurs due to certain imperfections in the labor market, and we'll talk about what are the kind of imperfections that are happening. So the various explanations for market failure, and the ones that some of them, Devraj Ray in this chapter 1, which is a very, very brief chapter, but you know, his chapters may be very brief. Even if they're brief, they're extremely dense. Okay. So each sentence is, and the next couple of readings we'll do will also be Devraj Ray on development economics, and they're extremely dense. So each sentence is really reviewing a whole theme in the literature in development economics. So one of the things he talks about is missing markets and the absence of markets in certain things. We'll discuss this. Another thing he talks about is externalities and how that how that is a market failure and it impacts the efficient or non-efficient solutions that arrive. Then he talks about missing information or information asymmetries. He actually does not talk about public goods as such in this particular thing, but of course his papers would be full of it. And then there's also the other issue of market power. So market power, you would have learned it in microeconomics as monopoly. So market power also can distort at the level of individuals, at the level for households and so on and so forth, and create inefficient solutions. There is another factor which is outside of market failure, which I'll talk about at the end. I hope I'll have the time to do that. It's what I would call endowment failure. Endowment failure is something that Amartya Sen and Jean Drèze have defined in their book, I think, Poverty and something, or Hunger, and it is in that Hunger book, I think, that they have defined it. I will find the readings and send it to you. But endowment failure is another thing, is where they are saying that markets are operating given a particular distribution of income and distribution of wealth. But if your distribution of income or distribution of wealth right at the beginning was inequitable, then who is to take care of that, and how do you take care of that? So that is an endowment failure. We'll talk about that at the end, as and when we find time. Okay, to talk about this, yes.
Ishita has been logged out. She's waiting. She's in the waiting room. Can you let her in? Yeah.
Okay, I think I'll just have to make one of you a host. Okay, Abhishek, let me see if I can make you a co-host. So you please watch all that people's entry and exit. Okay, I can see Dishta, but she entered 3 times, I think, now. But anyway, that's a game that's going to keep happening here. We can't do much about that. All right, so Okay, now we're talking about missing markets. So he says that a lot of the story of development economics revolves around the fact that certain types of markets were not there. And the solutions that came out when those markets were not there are extremely innovative solutions. So if people find that certain things are not available to them, certain markets are not operational where they are living in their developing economy, then they don't just sit back and cry. They find solutions to all these things themselves. And so they have the most innovative institutions have been created because of missing markets. Can somebody give me some example of that kind? I don't remember what he himself said.
So, like he has given one very interesting example is that of joint families, and maybe I think what he meant is that it will be like a support system, which is helping you when the government is maybe not helping you.
Yeah. So like even in the migration case, you can see it, or social security, when it's not available to them, they go for the credit. Now, one of the big things in this thing is the credit market. Access to capital. So when people are not able to get institutional support to get loans, that is there basically that you can call that as missing credit markets. So when you have that kind of a situation, various mechanisms start operating. And he talks about labor being used as collateral to form, and that might lead to bonded labor, but a form of bonded labor, not really. What does that mean, that labor is used as collateral?
It means that so how the way bonded labor works is that and you would have see the thing is you are indebted to that person because you would have initially taken a loan, but then the thing is your rate of interest is just going to compound. So you are never going to be free of having paid the principal amount and the interest, and so you are bonded to that person. And then it happens even generationally where even the children are sold into it.
Yes, that's when that's real bonded labor, when they are sold, when the children are also into that and have to repay that loan. So it is that I want a loan for maybe something very simple, maybe a social event or maybe something of that kind, but I don't have it. And so then where do I get it? There's no market for that. I mean, I can't go to the bank and say I need money to marry off my daughter. So then your labor, so you say that I will give my labor to you, to whoever is the landlord there, and that labor is used as a collateral, right? Because you can't, you don't have land, you don't have papers of anything, so that's used as a collateral. Another very fantastic institution that has developed to take care of this kind of a situation of missing credit markets are what are called self-help groups. Now, you know what self-help groups are, right? Can we have somebody like Purvi, can you tell me what is a self-help group?
Ma'am, no idea as such.
No idea. Okay. Any of the non-economic students know what a self-help group is?
Self-help groups are small groups of people, or especially nowadays in rural areas, they have women as a group of people, and they help each other in either earning or developing something.
Yeah. So they become credit
Something
groups.
similar to
Yes.
NGO like.
Yes. What did you say?
I mean, they function similar to NGOs. I mean, they help others and economically backward or.
So it's like a chit fund. I mean, women in a neighborhood come together. Mostly it is women, and they put in some amount of money every month, and then at the end of the month, one person gets all that money, and that rotates. So it's like they are called ROCAs also, rotating credit associations, and they are famous all over the country. And the person who was very famous for that is who? In Bangladesh?
Muhammad Yunus.
Yes, Yunus.
He started the microfinance.
Microfinance, right. So these things develop into these microfinance, and then they federate upwards, and then they become the larger microfinance organizations. All right. So that is also in a response to missing markets. It's in a response to missing credit markets, that kind of a situation. Okay, and similarly, insurance markets, those are missing. And so somebody, I think Asha right at the beginning spoke about the friends and relatives coming up when they need something. So that's another kind of, so you don't have health insurance, or you don't have any other kind of situation, like in the migration situation, you have unemployment and so on. So then your friends and relatives are acting as your social security in some sense. So they insure you against whatever eventuality. So this is basically you are facing a shock. So whatever that shock is, you are normally able to, you should be able to have an insurance system which will, you can pay for that, a premium, and that shock can be taken care of. Like we have car insurances and house insurances and health insurance and so on and so forth. But then if you don't have that kind of a system which can take small amounts of money, small premiums from people who can't afford too much, then what do they do when they hit a shock of that kind, a health shock, for example? Health shocks can wipe out entire families because of the amount of money that they have to. COVID is doing it to a lot of households. So that is another kind of missing market, so then you have other kind of institutional arrangements start coming up to take care of that. In the microfinances are also going in for micro insurance, and you have micro insurance as well. So these missing markets can create inequality in incomes and wealth, that we can see very easily if you just extend any of these examples that you have given, that we have given. They ultimately end up more into bondage, more inequality is created. Friends and relatives also, in the final analysis, you really have to repay them. It's not that, friends and relatives ne aapko aise de diya. So that can create income, more inequality, and that can have its impact on the growth of the economy as well, the per capita incomes, the rate of growth of that, and so on and so forth. So that is one of the market failures, just that the market doesn't exist, missing markets. Now, the next kind of failure that he talks about are externalities. Externalities, you can have positive externalities as well and negative externalities. So what is an externality? Can somebody tell me with an example maybe?
I'm suppose if I talk about the negative externalities, air travel causes an increase in pollution. So that is negative externalities.
Air travel?
Yeah, like airways.
Okay.
Yeah, and if I talk about the positive externalities, like walking to work reduces congestion.
Okay. So pollution is one of the externalities which is created, and it is created by any kind of commuting activity, your cars, your so on and so forth, air pollution. We know that Delhi and many of the cities are facing this kind of an air pollution. Air pollution is an easy thing to think about in terms of for externalities. So why does that happen? That happens, some externalities could happen because certain kinds of markets are not functioning properly, are not functioning effectively. Okay, now markets, basically what do they evaluate? Cost and benefits, right? They look at what kind of benefits you're getting, what are the costs involved in that, right? And that is how they arrive at the market arrives at a price for that thing. So the benefits will determine that the person is willing to pay, and the costs determine that the sellers have a cost, the buyers have a price that they have to pay. And depending on the benefits and costs, a market is developed. And that market, if it is not the most efficient market, it can create something which is not intended. That is an externality, all right? So when cars are driven, it's done for the good of mankind. If buses are flying on the street, it's done for the good of the people in the city, right? But then going back to your example of air pollution, the negative externality that is created is the air pollution, all right? So that is when, this is the definition, like when an economic action or a choice of one person can affect the welfare of somebody else who's not involved in that choice, and it's not necessarily that I intend to kill the other guy with the pollution in my car, but that is what happens. So ultimately, it becomes a choice of the societies. What does the society choose to do? Do we choose to have more public transport, or do we choose to have more private transport? Now, countries like the United States have decided that private transport is what they want. and they probably create the maximum pollution around the place. Countries like ours are moving in that direction. Anyway, that's not the only thing that creates pollution. Okay, now why does this market fail? So why can we not make these characters who are polluting the place pay for it, right? So the thing is that they can drive their car and pollute without having to pay for it. So what happens then is that the private benefits from driving the car are greater than the social benefits. The social benefits become a bit negative because of the pollution and so on and so forth. All right. So what will happen in this case is that in this kind of negative externalities, the private sector will overinvest in this particular thing. So let's take, can you give some other example other than the car example?
Ma'am, industries.
Yes, industries, that's absolutely. So what happens to, like in an industrial estate, what happens?
The
You people
actions.
are pollution people. I mean, you're the climate change guys. Yeah, tell me.
So basically, the production, whatever they are manufacturing there, the pollution created by the industry pollutes the surrounding atmosphere or maybe air, which is indirectly harming the people of that area.
Right. So this is like, okay, you have a lot of waste coming out of any industry, right? So they pollute the rivers, they pollute the land. Some of the waste that they have, either they just throw it into the Yamuna or even our Sabarmati, or then they just bury it in the ground, and so on. So that is, why are they doing that? They're not being made to pay for it. So now you people have this carbon credits and so on and so forth
Caps
option,
and credit.
right? Tell me about that.
Cap and credit.
Yes. What is it supposed to do?
So basically, I mean the policy which government policies which are there, certain caps are maintained that beyond this you cannot emit CO2 in the atmosphere,
Yes.
and the certain countries can also sell that credit to people who are already emitting a lot, and they buy those credit and take a permission to emit more in the
To make more pollution.
yeah. So indirectly that is a problem only, but at least to maintain a limit, and because that is something which they have to invest in. I mean, when you buy, you have to
Yes.
invest your finance.
Correct. So what
Yeah.
they're doing with that is trying to make them pay for it.
Yeah.
So you make them pay for that cost of. So industrial estates like Ankleshwar had done it relatively early, sewage treatment plants and so on and so forth. So the whole industrial estate comes together and pays to create this industrial waste management system. So that those whatever waste is downgraded and got rid of in a more efficient fashion and does not does not give negative externalities to the people who live around that place, right? So yes, anyone else wants to say something? Right. So so that is one example of market failure, which creates externalities. This is the reason being that you are not able to get these private people to pay for the full cost of what they are doing. So they get away with it, and for a very long time, we haven't even thought that it was a cost. It's only now when it's become kind of a disaster kind of situation that people have started talking about making them pay for this. So that's negative externalities. And positive, you can have positive externalities as well, where the social benefits are greater than the private benefits. When this kind of a thing happens, then there would be an underinvestment by the private entities. Can you give some example of that?
Education.
Education, yes, education. But of course, private education does exist. So education at very low fee, for example, right? So if you have public schools and you want to give education to a very large, so you're not quite meeting the total costs. The fees is not fully compensating for the total cost of that thing. So and you are paying for it in some fashion. So your social benefit is greater than the private benefits. Then in this case, if the social benefit is greater, the private entities will not want to invest in that.
So, ma'am, CSR would be coming in positive externality, CSR activity.
CSR is like an effort to try to make the companies pay for something
Yeah.
other than so that you're making so much of profit, and you're not doing anything for the society, so you do something for the society, and so that it's a kind of a forced thing. But they are not taking care of any externality. They're not saying कि आपने आपकी जमीन यहाँ की जमीन pollute किया, इसीलिए you use your CSR to do that. They can't do that.
Right. Okay. Okay.
You can't use your CSR for your own
Cover up the
company's activity or part of that activity and so on. There's some rules with regard to that, right?
Okay.
Ma'am, you were saying, ma'am, in the previous slide, when you're saying that if the social benefit is more, then the private sector tends to exit. But then the thing is, that's just a byproduct, right? The private sector would exit if there is no money to be made, such, right?
Yes.
So, ma'am, can we consider a green cover in a cities, which is a social benefit, but I don't know, private sector does exist or not? I mean, if the initiative is taken by the government, then probably yes. But if some private companies start, taking into the account that I want to cover this patch,
Yes.
So does it account in this externality? I mean, this social benefit and private?
So you mean to say they're trying to take care of the fact that they are polluting the air by creating more, trees?
I'm a tree, but then not actually deforestation, but cutting down the trees in the city level, probably. Does it includes externality?
Cutting down this is a negative externality. Will create negative externalities, right?
The question here is also, it's like, are you saying that because the private players are usually exiting because in most things that cause social benefit, there is not much money for them to be made? That's the reason why they are.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
what you're trying to say, Asha, is that sometimes the market itself operates in that fashion. Isn't that what you're
Yeah.
saying?
No, yeah, that's what I'm asking. Like, is that correct?
It might be operating in that fashion as well. I mean, we'll have to find examples of these
Examples
things to
to
make it
yeah.
clearer.
Yeah.
All right. So let's take. So the great person who did and spoke about this is a course. So if any of you take up game theory, the advanced microeconomics course later in the year, later in the year, I think, then I guess you'll be talking about the various the course theorem basically, which is the prisoner's dilemma and so on and so forth. You'll be doing that in game theory. So what is it basically? That you need two sides to create an externality. Okay, one is causing the externality, and the other fellow is suffering. All right. Now, Post says that there can be a solution to this, and that's when they come up with game theoretic solutions to this. If these two guys can sit together, bargain across the table, and arrive at some solution with which then can be considered a zero transaction cost kind of solution, and then the result that comes out of that would be a more efficient solution to the use of resources. Now, the most common thing that, other than air pollution, is the whole issue of common property resources. That is what is taken up as a very famous case when they talk about externalities, negative externalities. So, what could be, what is the common property resource, CPRs they're called? What does that mean? What are the positive or negative externalities there? Is it positive or negative? Can you give me an example of externality coming out of the common property? What are common property resources?
Water.
Yes.
River. So in case of industries, when they are polluting rivers and water around the area, that cause a issue that are they allowed to leave their waste in the water or not, because it's creating welfare issues and it's creating problem for the people who are living around it. So it is, but it's a common property.
Correct. So water is a big issue actually. Water, drinking water that people are pumping out of the ground. Now that's a common property. I mean, who is giving them the right to do that? And what is the negative externality coming out of that?
Many health issues also.
Yes, the
If
city
they're
of
tainting the water, yeah,
Water
if the
table
effluents are
also-
tainting the water.
Water table is also going down.
Yes, Chaitali?
Water table is going down.
Absolutely. So the water table is just, in Ahmedabad, like 30 years ago, you could dig like 10 feet or 10, I don't know, maybe not feet because that would be Kerala, meters, and you would get water. And then slowly, 10 years later, 15 years later, all the tube wells in the city started to dry up. And then they started to dig deeper and deeper, and then first round you get more, you get some water, and next round you get some water, and then in the third round you don't get any water anymore. It's gone. The aquifers have gone so much gone down because there is no law here with regard to some of the cities have that if you have one tube well here, then so many meters or so many meters from here you can't have another tube well. We don't have any law like that here. So I have a tube well, you have a tube well, the next guy has a tube well, and all of us are drawing from the same aquifer. So actually Ahmedabad has been saved. It would have died, the city. It was saved by this Narmada. So the Narmada water, which again, there are a whole lot of positive, negative over there. It was supposed to go for agriculture, but a lot of that water has come to the cities. So we get Narmada water in the municipal corporation gets Narmada water. What you see in the Sabarmati is Narmada water, and so on. So now to go back to common property resources. So the classic example of common property resources is the pasture lands in rural areas. Because I think most of you have your examples coming from urban. The pasture lands, why is that a problem? Why is that an issue that is spoken about in the literature on Prisoner's Dilemma and so on and so forth?
Partial lands are the lands where the animals of the farmers they gaze. So these lands are common, and who can put their animals in that land is also an issue. So some people who have more animals, then they can use more of the land. Some who have less animals then can, and then their point of time when there is no partial land left. So how it should be divided, who should have more access, less access,
That's
all those
right.
issues.
Absolutely. So what happens is that there were a lot of pasture lands, open common property resources, literally, in villages and even in urban areas. And like there were park areas and so on and so forth. But let's go back to the rural. And the farmers who had cattle, the animal husbandry people, would graze their cattle there. And it was common property and everybody used it. But over time, all kinds of encroachment started coming into that. And then the rich started to acquire these land and then legally, illegally, whatever it is, convert it into private property. And then slowly, this common lands have become like almost non-existent, right? So, the government will intervene. Government can intervene to prevent that kind of thing. But most times in the villages, what is happening over decades, nobody really understands what's happening over there. And then there are all kinds of power structures in the villages, and that operates like that. So ultimately, who loses? The poor. The poor people who have 1 or 2 cows or buffaloes, or like 2, 3, 4, and they were dependent completely on this. Now that common property has shrunk. There is hardly any grazing lands left anymore in the villages. And so then you see all this migration. There used to be migration even earlier from Kutch and all that. During a particular season, they come down here, come down towards the south. They go to South Gujarat basically. And similarly, Rajasthan, you see very little of it. Earlier, we used to see this migration because then they've just sold their cattle and it's not working. There isn't any common property, either there, here, or anywhere. So that is another classic case of negative externalities, where that area which was left to this thing, and then so then is there any kind of a game theoretic solution that you can come to it? How can these people sit together and decide how this common property can be shared, or at least not privatized? So now this privatization of government lands is happening in urban areas also. Many of the, Delhi, for example, was an extremely planned city. it had a lot of parks, areas which were parks. And then slowly there are encroachments, and sometimes the encroachments are by the poor also. The migrants are staying there, and then they use all kinds of ways in which to get rid of them and privatize that property. So that a lot of the open spaces, you need those open spaces where you have trees, where you can get some, breathing, that is a negative externality as soon as all these parks and trees are cut and so on and so forth.
Ma'am,
Yes.
there's a question. I do not know. It's a very debatable question, but in like encroachment in slum areas,
Yes.
is right? It is also common property resource, and slum areas are not occupied legally, but people are. It's an open resource where they are using.
Yes.
So
So that is a question. That is an urbanization problem. So earlier
yeah.
the governments were a little bit more, they closed their eye to this kind of encroachment, because the migrants are coming in, and ultimately those migrants, as we saw it very clearly now with the COVID, they are an essential component of that urban area. So if
Yes.
we are in a good situation, if the government was in that kind of a situation where they would worry about these kind of people, then some kind of housing should be made for these people, because those people are not hanging around there for fun.
Right.
They're hanging around there because they are providing a service to the people who live in this place,
Right.
right? And they're also earlier, now of course they've shifted out all industries from the big cities. So all industries which were small industries which were there inside Delhi, Bombay, and even our place have all been moved out into the peripheries. So some of this, the people who were working there have also moved out. But earlier, much of this was inside. So the
Right.
original textile mills, if you see here in the other part of the city, they all had housing colonies. All the
Right.
textile mills had housing colonies. If you go there to the Bapunagar or Gontipur or those areas, you'll see those housing colonies. They're still there. They have now become, low-income housing because
Yes.
the mills have closed down, right? So that is an efficient solution. You start, and same thing in Bombay. When originally the mills were inside Bombay, they've all been thrown out. Some of them have become malls and things like that. And property was sold in order to, anyway, it's all another whole issue. So if they are not provided that, then you will get this people coming in, and I would place it as a negative externality of that industry which refuses to provide space for these people to live.
Yes, because
Right? So government can come in and say that, look, now we're talking a lot about Awas Yojana and this Yojana and things like that. We still, our housing stock in this country is just not enough of any size. All right, good
yes.
question raised by you.
Ma'am, so the areas like this Gulbai Tekra, where people have actually encroached, and the property rights are with some builder, or and FEC, that is the center of the city, and that area
You
is
know,
like,
right. See, Gulbai Tekra, Vastrapur, this Memnagar, like 30 years ago when I first came here, they were all villages.
yeah.
Vastrapur was a village. These people are villages, and I don't know how much of time I have to tell you stories, but the garba that used to happen there, common garbas that used to happen in Memnagar, it used to happen in that big fields which are still there, open next to that Manav Mandir. Um, and then in Gulbai Tekra, there would be these thing in Vastrapur, in Jodhpur Tekra, there's a Jodhpur village. Traditional costumes, real rural people who have come and that village, because it was a village. It was a beautiful site, and it was open. We didn't have all these safety issues, and we definitely didn't have COVID. It was the most beautiful thing. So in reality, it was their land, it was their villages. We have encroached onto that, right? Over time, they have been legalized and so on and so forth, and then now everything has been declared as urban and so on and so forth, but they have been crushed. So Gulbai Tekra, when its original scheme of things was a village. So it was their village, it was their land, it was them. We are the encroachers, right? And now we treat them like, okay, that's not to say that only the villagers are living there anymore, naturally, because as the population happens, the jobs are available here. When we do the Lewis's growth model, we'll see that. So people come in from rural areas to urban areas expecting to get a job and to get a job at a better wage. So then where do they live? They're not going to come and live in my society, okay? So then where will they live? So then they'll go into these villages, which have anyway deteriorated, and those people also need some income. So then they start staying there, then they start overcrowding and so on and so forth, and that's how these problems start. But the original problem is not theirs. The problem is ours, created by us. Sorry, you'll hear this all the time from me. So, all right, but it was a good question. And again, it's an urban issue. Okay, now the third one. The third kind of thing is asymmetric information or missing information, right? So the classic example they give for asymmetric information is in trading. So all of you who are management students, now let me find one of you management students. Pearl, can you tell me some kind of a negative thing that comes out of asymmetric information in business? Pearl? Are you even there?
Ma'am, she has left a message. I think her mic is not working.
Okay, because she's there. Okay, what about Dishta? Dishta is there? Dishta has been in and out. Your mic is not working either?
Hello, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. So tell us something about asymmetric information that you might know with regard to business or anything else in the management field.
So, ma'am, yes, regarding asymmetric information, it is one of the major problems when we look at it from the point of view of financial markets. When you borrow and lend, so it becomes it arises out of an economic transaction where when you're borrowing or when you're lending or whenever you're trading into any sort of financial markets within the institution.
Correct. So one of the big examples that they, with regard to, anybody wants to say something?
Hello, ma'am. Can you hear me now?
Yes, Pearl, tell me.
Yeah, ma'am, about the, we can say the example like selling a car. So, sometimes when we buy a car from like a second-hand car, so sometimes the people don't tend to give a proper information, right? Is there something problem in the engine or something, whatever it is. So that can be an example.
Correct, absolutely. So that is, you are, what is happening there is that the owner of the car has more information and the person who is buying the car has less information. So there's asymmetric information. So the minute you have asymmetric information, the person who's the seller, he is at an advantage, right? So the pricing decision which happens over there might not be an efficient one. That's the thing. Now, the really bad, yes?
Ma'am, I have one question. Is it something related to uncertainty of the markets? Like how much I am investing, I'm not sure how much in return I will be getting.
You don't have full information in that sense. But if you're investing, you are supposed to, the investments that you're making, they are supposed to have full disclosure, right? So they're supposed to have it, and it will be there. It will be in that tiny, tiny print which you won't be able to read. Yes, Dishta. Dishita. I don't know, how do you pronounce your name?
So, ma'am, like it happens most of the time. Ma'am, Dishita.
Yes. Yes.
So, ma'am, what happens is like, especially while you are trading in the stock market, for example, as you rightly mentioned in the presentation, here, like when you there are some people who know who are really aware of what the information is going to be like, when the market opens up. There are many people who are not really aware, and then there are some people who get the tips from the people who are at a higher position. So, like that is how they somehow take the advantage of the.
Absolutely. So that is what is called insider trading. And there have been some very, very, very big scams. The one that we had here was the Harshad Mehta scam. There was this Deepak, somebody in the United States, he was a academic actually, was on the boards of many companies, and the people on the boards of companies have inside information, and then they used it to help somebody to buy the stocks and so on and so forth. That's called insider trading. Okay, that's estimate. Now, if you come to rural areas and come to
yes. Is this only market driven when we talk about missing information? Like
we are talking about market failures.
Okay.
We are talking about markets. Okay, so this is another form of market failure. Okay, now in the case of agricultural products also you can have this where, the poor farmer who is in the village doesn't have access to information, and so he doesn't know at what price he needs to sell, and then he ends up selling at very low price. He ends up selling at very low prices. To take care of that is why we have these MSPs where the government goes in and buys at a particular price. We also had these APMCs, agricultural product markets, which is supposed to be operating at prices which are declared and known, so that people don't completely. So to take care of some of those things, some of these government policies had come into being. APMCs have now become a problem, and they're trying to dismantle them, because again, in spite of having the APMCs, you are still having asymmetric information. And so there are two things which I think somebody was trying to say that with regard to that insurance, buying and selling cars. So there are two things that we spoken about when you talk about asymmetric information. One is adverse selection and the other is moral hazard. Now, moral hazard is, see, this adverse selection, you can give n number of examples. If anybody has an example to give, you can give me. But one of the things that happened here is like the famous financial crisis that we had in 2008. It started as this housing crisis in the United States, and then it started spreading. So how did that happen? Why was that adverse selection? Why is that an example of adverse selection? Can somebody tell me? Now, all you economists can open your mouth.
Now, it might be with the idea of earning more profits, faster profits, right? The idea of housing crisis came in because, ma'am?
Is that adverse selection?
No, ma'am. See, the thing is, in adverse selection, it's a wrong choice of the clients, right? So what was happening was, as I understand it, it might be wrong. In the subprime crisis, what was happening was that these houses were being, like, you could buy it, but then the rate of interest was like flexible. And what was happening was that it was increasing, and these people weren't able to pay off the loans.
Well, that was not really the adverse selection. What was, Saurit, are you there?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, can you tell me what is adverse selection in that housing crisis?
Textbook, that means the textbook definition of adverse selection is that what I have studied is called that lemon problem.
Lemon market.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell me the lemon market story.
So people don't have, there's a incomplete information or asymmetric information. So,
about prices of lemons or what? Sorry? Okay, I think we've lost him.
Ma'am,
So,
can I try?
Yes, please, Lucky.
So adverse selection is when sellers have information that buyers do not have, and in subprime crisis, what I think is that seller of the houses were doing that. There's a bubble which is becoming that housing bubble, and it will burst anytime. So
right, actually here the people were, yes, Dishita. Yes, Dishita.
So, ma'am, I believe what happened during the the housing finance crisis was that there were tranches and CDOs, both of them. So what was happening was that the sellers were aware of the rate of the bonds, but the buyers were not aware of it. They all thought that all of them were the AAA CDOs, but actually they were triple Bs and triple Cs, so which was like the lowest category. And then when the actual bubble bursted, it was all of them who had bought loans on a very high percentage of interest. Like all of them had like they were indebted with.
Correct. So that is the one side of it. The beginning of this was that housing they thought can never collapse because sabko to ghar chahiye. So they started to the banks, the villains of the piece in all of this are the banks and then higher level banks. So the ones who made that CDOs or whatever those were. I mean, who put together all these bad assets and created new assets and then sold that out in the market again. At, like you said, higher rates and so on. So the villain of the piece were the other banks. So they started to give loans to anybody and everybody, even though they know. So suppose I buy a huge house, I can buy a house and take SBI loan. They will check my income certificates and 10 other things and figure out whether I can pay that. What is that thing called? EMI, right? So, but because they wanted to, sort of create rotating money, they started lending to people who could not. They were quite sure they'll never be able to repay those loans, but they were giving it to them because they thought, क्या है उसमें? ये house इनका नहीं होगा तो इनसे ले लेके दूसरे को बेच देंगे. We'll be able to keep on selling that house because housing market can never fail. That's what the idea was. And so on that, the bad loans were converted into, joined together, made into something else, and sold again and again and again. So in this whole thing, the banks actually knew. Ultimately, normally what happens is that you are not able to tell whether that person can pay for it or not. And that is when you have a wrong selection of clients. They did a wrong selection of clients, but it was done almost purposefully. And then later on, that was compounded into all these other products, financial products, and sold in the market at high rates of interest. And then when it came to these people having to repay as the interest rates went up, and then they took the houses back. But then the houses went on the market and could not be sold. And that's when the whole thing burst and came off. Now, what is model hazard? The person who was talking about that car spoke about this. So in insurance also you have a model hazard. What is the model hazard in an insurance? Can somebody tell me? Suppose you're taking a car insurance. What is the model hazard?
Oh, ma'am, it's like when the car is insured,
Yes.
the person owning the car, like he feels like secure, so he doesn't maintain the securities and other.
Correct. He takes more risk than he should.
Yeah.
Okay. क्योंकि उनको पता है कि ये कार अगर इधर-उधर crash हो जाए तो as long as he doesn't die, his car का पैसा तो मिल जाएगा, right? So there's a moral hazard there. So all kinds of undistinct deals can happen there when you know that something is going to collapse anyway, but then you sell it, like that used car thing that the child was talking about, right? So that is moral hazard. So I mean, it's an extremely complicated problem. So now this is not to say we're talking about developing countries. This is not to say that these problems don't exist in developed countries. They do exist. But the examples we are giving also are more like developed country examples. But there would be many issues which are developing country issues, which are exacerbated by the fact that you have asymmetric information, like land deals, for example, and so on. A whole lot of issues are there, and that is why this is important for developing economics. Otherwise, it's a huge problem anyway, asymmetric information. But it's not the poorest of the poor who are buying stocks, right? And or cars. So those are not the examples for us in developing economics, but that exists.
Ma'am?
Okay. Yes.
Ma'am, we don't have proper data like for poverty data, for example, NSSO data for very long time, which makes difficult for policymakers to understand the real scenario, and it in turn hinders the country's economic development. So does this also account into information asymmetry, like missing information data?
Well, that is why you're saying that when the government is making public policy, they really don't have enough information.
Yeah, because that will also hinder countries.
But here we are talking about a market transaction, right?
Okay.
We are talking about market transactions where there is a market failure. So there is a market, and that market, somebody is transacting something over there. Somebody is buying and selling or doing something over there, and in that asymmetric information exists.
Oh.
So when government making public policy, you know, that, I mean, information is that the government doesn't have information and that we have poor data and all that's absolutely correct. I'm the, you know, the best person to you know, complain about that. Okay. But we are talking about transactions in the market. Okay. Like public goods now is something closer to what you're saying. Okay. Now, what is a public good? Can anybody give me some example of a public good?
Air,
Parks,
water,
public parks.
air, water.
Clear water, good water. Yes, what was it you said? Pond.
Parks.
He said parks.
Parks. Yes, parks. Correct. So all those examples we gave about trees and parks and things like that. Yes. Because
Would
who would
railway
say
come
a park?
into public goods now? In
Pardon?
India? In India, would railway comes into public good?
Okay. Now, why is why was railway a public good so far?
Because it's run by the government.
No, 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 no. Of course, it was run by the government, but why was it run by the government? That is why it's a public good.
Okay, why was it run by the government? Okay, the other way around.
Okay, let's go ahead.
For the
So public good is railways in that sense is not. I don't know whether that's a public good. Yes, Dishita. So a public good has certain characteristics. It is
Ma'am, because at that point of
yes. He switched off. Okay, a public good is something where
so ma'am, the amount of investment that was required at that point of time for a not so
correct. That's more like a social benefit thing. No? Social benefit of that may be higher than like somebody said, public education is a social benefit greater than the private benefit. So similarly, public transport is you know.
okay, that is the difference. Like public hospitals and education, schools and all that, they are not public goods but run by the government. So that's a difference between the two.
Yeah, you see, the thing is that over time, a lot of things which were public goods are now being privatized. So, so what is a public good? Let's first talk about that. So, public good is one which, if I use it, then you can also use it. The utility of that, the ability of for you to benefit from that thing is not reduced because I used it. That is a public good. Okay, and that characteristics is called non-diminishable or non-rival good. All right. And the other characteristic of a public good is that it is difficult to keep other people from enjoying that that good. Okay, and that is called non-excludable. Now you think of examples of something which I can use and you can also use. The benefit is not. So if it is a so a completely private good is something like a McDonald's sandwich or burger. Okay, because if I eat it, you can't eat it. Correct? All right. So now what is this something that I can use and still I do not exhaust the benefits of that and you can use?
Air.
Air. Okay.
Ma'am, open.
Air is not a good.
Open spaces in sense open squares.
Yes, so that's why that kid spoke, whoever spoke about gardens or public spaces.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Something else? Roads.
Yeah.
Right. Street lights. So if I stand under the street light, I get as much light as if you stand under the street light. Right. Now these public roads. So roads in that sense are your railway. All right. It is made again because the private benefits are less than the social benefits. So nobody would want to do that. So all that story you were telling me about the railways and how it was too expensive, in some sense is correct. Because why would anybody put up a railway? They are not able to get the full benefit of having spent so much of money on that, the return, right? So the private benefit of setting up a railway would be less than the social benefits that would go. So they would not set up a railway. And same goes for street lights. Why would I set up street lights? So जो तुम भी use करोगे, मैं भी use करूँगी, मुझे क्या return मिलेगा? Right? So then in some such goods, the market fails. So when the market fails, then the government comes in and tries to set that up. So in the original scheme of things, we set up railways, or rather the British set up railways to facilitate themselves, right? To take the, why did they set up the railways? What is the primary purpose of the British setting up the railways? The tracks.
Goods.
Yes, Chaitani?
Transportation goods.
Yeah, so transportation of goods, which was mostly raw material, which they were taking from there to the ports. So you have a lot of railways going towards the Kolkata port and towards Chennai port or Bombay Presidency and so on and so forth, because they were basically taking away these goods, right? So at that point in time, but now railways so far has not been privatized, but many other things have been privatized. So if you take the example of the TV, so originally we had only Doordarshan, okay? So I grew up, I didn't even grow up, there was nothing there. Later on, much later, this Doordarshan came, right? So again there, because of that bandwidth or whatever width that is, it was, you have, now they all got privatized. So TV channels, which were completely used as a public good, because if they project the TV thing, then I can see and you can also see, right? I cannot prevent you from seeing. But many of these goods have now been privatized. And so then the benefits that they will get out of it goes up.
Ma'am, I have a question. You're saying that so if the road's a public good, then and if the road on the road, if there's like a toll,
Yes,
does it still remain a public?
No, then it become a private good.
Okay.
So now with the privatization, so ever since 1991 happened, when the economic reforms came and the opening up of the economy and the privatization started to become the order of the day. After that, many of the things which we knew as public goods have now been privatized. So you have some things which then they first become semi-private and then they become private, like all the TV channels. We never had TV channels. Now you have all the, the TV channels which are privatized, including maybe the radio channels like Radio Mirchi and etc. etc. But there are some things which are still not, like for example, national defense. Which maybe the equipment can be made by something and something and all is going on. Okay. These are mostly goods that are, difficult to exclude people from this thing. Yet some of these things cannot be bought or sold. Like for example, street lights. You can't really, buy that. So, ये street light है, ये मेरा है. But now even roads are being privatized. So, like you said, Asha just spoke about the highways. So the highways are being privatized. So that's why you have all that toll business and all that, right? So up to a point, they can take this thing from.
No, ma'am, but that way, even like if you travel by the train, right, you still have to pay the ticket. So, but it's still owned by the government.
Not a free good.
Yeah. Okay. But yeah, it's not
free good. But they should be able to. So if they set up I really don't know how they're going to do railways, but they've definitely done the airways. Airways bhi nahi tha na. We had only Air India and Maharaja and the other Air India, whatever it was, Indian Airlines. That's all we had. So usko bhi privatized kar diya hai. So similarly, now they're talking about privatizing particular routes in the railways.
Metro
So,
has come up, which is partially private.
Yeah.
Metros have come up, which are not fully government operated.
What networks?
Metro.
Metro, right. Metros, yes. So a lot of the public transport is like bus services. Earlier, we just didn't have any private bus services. Now you have a lot of private bus services, right? And so on. Okay. Okay. Now, there are some other, the one more thing again, which he doesn't talk about, but it's basically market power and monopolies. So monopoly is a good thing in microeconomics, but It can do harm as well. So where, can you give me some example of a private entity trying to monopolize and misbehaving, overpricing, preventing entry of other people?
Reliance by
Excellent. For what?
in Geo market right now, it's trying to especially
Absolutely.
lower the pricing so that the competitors go out of the market.
Correct.
In many of that is their policy. In many of the other markets, they are trying to do the same thing.
Absolutely. So they're underpriced to such a level because they have very, very deep pockets and they can afford to take losses in the beginning, and then they kill all the other. And then we are supposed to have a competition commission which is supposed to take care of that. But then there's so much of lobbying and whatnot going on. So we have the competition. We have the competition law, and then we have the competition commission, which is supposed to try to make sure that private entities don't misbehave in the market. So market power could be misused. Now Microsoft had to go through some violations because they would sell their their Windows and so on, and they bundled the goods and they sold it together and things like that. So there's a big case against Microsoft. You management people can go and look up some of these things. And then how did the government come in to do this? So we have the competition policy, which is basically an antitrust kind of policy. And that competition policy is a very complex thing. It is shifting from competition law and trying to restrict companies becoming bigger, and they're becoming more like trying to keep the markets competitive. So try to become, yes.
Ma'am, can we put the example of Air India privatization in this?
Yes, definitely. Air India, see, there was a time when this government of India used to be in all kinds of private markets where they had no business to be. There was a time when they were making bread. There was this big bakery called Modern Bread, and the government was making bread. So you had government making watches. They had no business to be there. It's all supposed to be in the private sector, but then they were there. So there are some. So these things called railways and some of these things, they are called natural monopolies. So it makes sense to have certain natural monopolies, like the bandwidth kind of idea. Now it's all changed. Things are changing like nobody's business these days. So there are some things which are natural monopoly, like for example, defense. It's about the only thing left now, I think, which is a natural monopoly for a country as a whole. All right. So I think we are kind of coming to, but I'd like to talk about just one more thing. I think we're already at 5:15 and I should be quitting this place. But there's just one more thing that I'd like to talk about, which is not directly written in, this market power and all that is not directly written in this chapter in his thing. But if you want to see a complete this thing of market failures, I just thought I should speak about all these things so that later on that we can talk about it. Now, what is endowment failure? What could be endowment failure? We were talking about market failures, the market failing. So there's a concept of endowment failure, which has been brought out, raised by Amartya Sen and John Dress and all that. What could it be?
So it's like, okay,
Yes.
no, it's just an idea. Is that, ma'am, you had spoken about this earlier. When suppose you have people who are born into privilege, then you also have people who aren't born into wealth. So those who are, rich to begin with have this like unfair starting advantage that sets them ahead nearly always.
Absolutely. So when in all of economics, we start by assuming that there is some distribution of income, and nobody talks about whether that's a fair distribution of income or not. All right. So distribution of income is something that is not talked about too much when it comes to microeconomics or any of the other pure traditional economics. So it is assumed that there is a distribution of income, and then story starts from there. All right. But who is to so there is an inadequate, there is an unequal distribution of income. Now, of course, with Piketty and all that, a lot of emphasis is coming on that. Not that any government is doing anything about it. So so we begin this thing thinking that there is socially optimum allocation of resources, an appropriate distribution of resources and endowments. But suppose it's not there, and it's not there. We all know that it's not there. So who can fix this initial distribution, and how can you fix it? So this is what is thought of as an endowment failure. So the starting point itself is wrong, right? So and then public policy and government, they do all kinds of welfare measures and so on and so forth. Now Dress and Sen, there's this book Hunger and Poverty or something like that, where they're basically talking about the famine of the Bengal famine, and they talk about this endowment failure affecting in two ways, through the market, where the market actually operates and does something that it should not do. And another case where endowment failure happens is when the markets don't do anything. They fail to do what they're supposed to do. And then he gives examples of what happened during the famine. Asha, you can tell us. Why did that become a crisis?
Well, it became a crisis because what was happening was so the Bengal famine was essentially a man-made crisis, because a lot of the produce that was made was whatever was produced was diverted toward the war effort, and so in that sense it is not that there's not enough that is being produced. It was not, and that's why.
That's right. And there was a lot of hoarding going on.
Yeah. So, and this happened also in famines later on, right, where you had these zoning policies which restricted the movement of food. So it's an absolute. It's very sad, but then it's an artificial scarcity.
Yes, that's right. So they call it the errors of commission. That means the market is working, but then it's working in a bad way. There's hoarding taking place and so on and so forth. So what can the government do about it? It can either come down on black marketeers and so on, and then do public provision. Okay, you need one thing for the war, but then you also need to feed the people. So public provisioning of food grains, like again the migration crisis is another problem here. So, and the other thing is what they call omission. That is, you already have an unequal distribution of income. So then what do you do to correct that? Obviously, private property is the sanctity of private property. So we can't do anything about that. They did try land reforms very long ago, right in the beginning, but that no longer exists. So then you have all these, what I call extremely inadequate policies, but an effort at food for work, then public education, right to education, public health, which are all not fully properly funded and so on and so forth. But these are ways to try and take care of what is this called endowment failure. So that's another kind of a failure, which is not talked too much about in the literature, but people like Jean Dress and so on, Amartya Sen have pointed this out and brought this up as an issue. All right. So we'll end here. All of that I've said is not necessarily there in that first chapter of this thing, but I thought that since he spoke only about the first one or two, three of market failures, but he does talk about certain other things because he wants to, study developing economies and the issues that are existing in developing economies. So he has this issue as to a lot of people say, why do you want to teach development economics? Issues of developing countries. Why can you not just split it up into labor economics and into international trade and what have you, all the other things? Why do you need to do it, especially in development economics? And then there is he gives some kind of a logic over there where he says that all these problems that we said, many of these problems might be existing in developed countries as well, all these market failures. But they are exasperated or exaggerated in the developing countries, and larger and larger proportions of the population are affected by these market failures, right? So when we're talking about developing economics, we'll be talking about poverty and inequality a lot. But that poverty and inequality, when you're trying to remove it, we want to say that the majority of the people should benefit from growth, should benefit from development which is happening. And it's not that, if 30% of the people are benefiting and 70% of the people are not benefiting, then that's not development. All right. So that is the point that they are trying to make as to why we need to study development separately. So like, for example, many of the examples we gave now of market failures, asymmetric information, and so on and so forth, were things that are affecting the rich countries and the rich more than the poor. But when we do development economics, we will focus on those issues which affect the poor and the majority of the population more than, so we will not talk about insider trading as an asymmetric information issue. You might talk about insurance, you might talk about credit and asymmetric information there. But then, so I have the right, he says, and I say also, to choose the topics that I would like to talk about in a development economics course. And that's what he says towards the end of this thing. And one thing is that development economics is not something that is, closed and kitab band kar diya ho gaya. I mean, that's not development economics. Whereas in most of neoclassical economics, most of the theories are already existing. So if you have a marginal utility, it behaves in a particular fashion. It doesn't behave in any other fashion. But here we will say that, so wages, there's a wage determination, there's an earnings function, it can behave in a particular fashion. But in development economics, we will say that that wage can be affected by social, economic, and political. So my wage might be different from your wage because my caste is different from your caste. So that is an issue which is generally not tackled in the normal traditional economics. But development economics will focus on that there's a social issue which is impacting the economic issue. There is a political issue, like for example, market power, which is impacting the economic behavior of individuals, households, and enterprises and countries. So that is how development economics is, they're trying to justify why we need to have, so it also has a lot of empirical work, empirical data, and empirical methods. So that is why I have, so many of the studies that we use will be using different kinds of econometric techniques and so on and so forth. So I'm not going to teach you any of those econometric techniques. I hope that most of you are taking the 604 course where some of these things will be talked about and you will be able to speak to them about. So there are some development economic courses which are purely run on methods. So you take a particular method like instrumental variable and then you talk about a series of papers which use that instrumental variable method to tackle a problem in development economics, to find a solution for development. I don't use that method. I use a method of looking at particular topics, each of our modules will have a particular issue, a problem which we will talk about. And there are this thing has 100 articles. Okay, I've tried very hard to choose some things that we can, at our level be able to discuss and so on. So now from tomorrow onwards, from the next class onwards, I'm going to distribute some of these readings to all of you. And in the next couple of classes, we are going to look at 2 articles of Devraj Ray, more recent articles of Devraj Ray, where he talks about development economics. And in some sense, it's kind of it kind of spans, it takes an overarching view of many of the topics which are used in development economics. So it might feel a bit overwhelming, but it's interesting to see right in advance, like where is this development economics going and what are the kind of problems and issues that can be talked about there. So I'm going to assign the next class to 4 of you actually. And, so there's this issue of convergence, which used to be a big topic which was studied in development economics. It's studied a little less now. So he calls it the traditional way of looking at development economics. That is, countries over time will converge, will become similar to each other. So those convergence things. So I'll have 2 people talk about convergence and then we'll have 2 people talk about non-convergence. Now I will send you the names and the kind of articles and the pages. The articles are all uploaded already on LMS. So everybody please open LMS and look at them on a regular basis. The articles will all come up there. There's one section there which I call measurement of income and development, growth and development. I'm not going to take that section at all because I think it's just too simple for people like you. And that is the Devraj Ray's 2nd chapter has been uploaded there, which basically talks about measures of poverty, measures of inequality, the Lorenz curve, Gini coefficients, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to do that at all because I don't want to spend my time talking to you about measurement. You will find out for yourself about measurement. Yes, you can leave. I'm going to end this class now because the next class will have to enter this space. So, okay, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the class, and I'm going to put up the link to these sessions will also be put up on LMS. I hope. Okay, bye.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Bye, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
I hope you enjoyed it. Bye.
Yes, ma'am.